I would argue that the United States has only gotten into a lot of wars since 1945. It was not involved in a lot of wars before the Cold War. Obviously, it was involved in World War II and World War I. But I think what's happened since 1945 is a function of first the Cold War and then the unipolar moment.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Z's Political Couch. Today, we're going to take a step back from the usual of what we do regularly on this channel. Today, we got Professor John Mearsheimer, as he'll be diving deep into the United States' complex history of military involvement, from world wars to the era of forever wars. America's global presence drastically shifted since 1945. But why has the U.S. become so entangled in conflicts post-Cold War? And what role does its liberal ideology play in the military strategy? He'll also break down the rise of the U.S. interventionism from the Cold War to the unipolar moment and examine how the pursuit of spreading democracy had led to costly wars and lives across the globe. Stay tuned as we explore the pivotal moments in the history and the implications on Americans' foreign policy.
During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were involved in a global security competition. We engaged with the Soviets all over the planet. Both sides thought that almost every area of the world or every region of the world was worth fighting over. And the end result of that is that the United States got involved in wars in places like Vietnam. The United States should never have fought in Vietnam. It was a foolish war. It had the war in Vietnam had hardly any implications for American security. But the reason we ended up fighting there is that we believed in the domino theory, which said that if we lost in Vietnam and Vietnam became communist, then Thailand would become communist, and Japan would become communist, then Korea would become communist, and pretty soon European countries would be communist, and finally the Americans, the United States, would become communist. This is the famous or infamous domino theory. And if you believe in the domino theory, you have to fight everywhere because you don't want that first domino anywhere to fall. So what you had was this global competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, right, that was underpinned by the domino theory. And that led us to get militarily involved, not necessarily to fight wars, but to get militarily involved all over the planet and to fight a handful of wars, some of which were unnecessary. I'm choosing my words carefully here. But that was nothing compared to the unipolar moment, which occurs after the Cold War ends and the Soviet Union collapses. So this is the period roughly from 1991 up to 2017. This is when the United States is fighting lots of wars, what we sometimes call the forever wars, right? And this is when many Chinese people get the sense that the United States does nothing but fight wars. Now, what's going on in the unipolar moment? Two things. Number one, the United States is a remarkably powerful country. By definition, if you're in a unipolar world, the United States is the only great power on the planet. So we are remarkably powerful and therefore free to use that power to fight wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. That's point number one. Point number two is the United States is a deeply liberal country, and its liberalism affects its foreign policy outlook. American foreign policymakers and many people in the American public believe that it is in our interest to run around the world and to turn other countries into liberal democracies, to make other countries look like us. We talked about engagement before. U.S. policy towards China was known as engagement. What was the ultimate goal of engagement? It was to turn China into a liberal democracy. What is the ultimate goal of the color revolutions that the United States has been purveying in Eastern Europe and would like to purvey in Russia? The ultimate goal of those color revolutions is to turn those countries in Eastern Europe and turn Russia just like China, into a liberal democracy. So you see this liberal ideology that sits at the heart of the American psyche, right, gives us a powerful incentive to run around the world and do social engineering to make the world over in America's image. And when you marry that fact with the fact that we are so powerful, it's not hard to see how we end up fighting wars to reshape the globe, to spread democracy, to spread capitalism, and so forth and so on. So what's happened in the unipolar moment, and this is again the period from roughly 1991 to 2017, is the United States got into the business of using military force in very liberal ways all around the planet and getting itself into a handful of disastrous wars.
Professor John Mearsheimer presents an interesting perspective that I'd like to touch on, that the United States' shift in foreign policy after 1945. He explains that the U.S. transitioned from a more cautious approach to a global involvement to becoming the world's leading military power, particularly after the Cold War. This shift, driven by a belief in spreading democracy and liberal ideas, has led the U.S. into numerous conflicts, some of which now view as unnecessary or misguided, especially in the Middle East. What stands out here is Mearsheimer's analysis is the idea of the U.S. as a Crusader state, a country deeply committed to reshaping the world in its image. This commitment to liberal democracy has had profound implications, though, not just in terms of military action, but also in how the U.S. engages with the rest of the world. Equally intriguing is the divide within American politics on this issue. While many elites continue to support an active interventionist role for the U.S., there's also a growing scene, particularly among parts of the Republican base, that it's time for more restrained foreign policy. This intertension highlights the complexity of American power and its place in the world.
So you talk about this liberal ideology, and there are a lot of other liberal democracies in this world, but no any other country is like United States, put liberal ideology as if it's a religion, it's a belief, and they want to spread it everywhere. Why?
Well, I actually think that after the Cold War ended, this liberal ideology took hold in Western Europe in a really big way. And I think the British, the French, and the Germans, and even the Italians drank the Kool-Aid, which is to say, they firmly supported America's global mission. They firmly supported this liberal mission. So there was very little resistance from the Europeans toward this American policy of what I call liberal hegemony. I think the West Europeans bought on to that ideology. But the big difference between the United States on one hand and these Western European countries is that we had the military power to make it possible to think that we could use that force we had to spread liberalism around the globe. The British have gone along with us. The British help us, but the British don't matter much because they're militarily not very powerful. The United States is an incredibly powerful country, and you take an incredibly powerful country that has a messianic ideology, right, that is committed to spreading democracy, and what you end up with is what I would call a Crusader state. The United States is a Crusader state. But again, going back to the Europeans, they're our allies in the process. They go along with us. And you see this in Ukraine, right? The Western Europeans, and certainly the Eastern Europeans, are with the United States all the way.
And I think people somehow, what we heard from especially the Republicans in the Congress right now, they kind of doubt about this. About spreading, can the United States really spreading this idea like when when the United States was a unipolar power. Are people starting to doubt about this right now?
Very important to distinguish between the publics and the elites, number one, and to distinguish between the two parties. Let's start with the Democratic Party. In the Democratic Party, down below in the public, you have lots of progressives who do not like the idea of American primacy and the idea of using American military force to fight wars all over the planet. On the other hand, you have a lot of neoconservatives, right? You have a lot of people like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris who are deeply committed to American primacy, right? So you have inside that Democratic Party down below, right? You have a split, okay? At the elite level, the neoconservatives, the hardliners, the primacists, they dominate. And the progressives take a back seat. The progressives don't have much influence at the elite level, okay? So what I'm saying to you is, if you look at the body politic and you look inside the Democratic Party, you see that there is a real divide. You see the same thing inside the Republican Party, okay? You have inside the Republican Party lots of neoconservatives, right, who want the Republicans to continue to pursue a primacist foreign policy, who want the United States to continue running around the world, to continue acting as a Crusader state. At the same time, you have a growing body of people inside the Republican Party who want restraint, who are tired of all these wars. So again, what you have in both parties is a split when you talk about the base. But up at the elite level in the Republican Party, because Trump has been so successful, you see that at the elite level, that division is beginning to show among policymakers and leading politicians. You don't see that in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is unified behind Kamala Harris. But inside the Republican Party, you have people like Lindsey Graham on one side and other hawkish Republicans, and people like Donald Trump on the other side. So you're beginning to see this set of differences that exist down below in both parties manifest themselves at the elite level in the Republican Party. And it is possible, we talked about this before, if Kamala Harris loses because of the Israel and Gaza issue, that those progressives will begin to have a large influence higher up at the elite level.
To wrap things up, what we see here is the evolution of the US foreign policy, particularly post-1945, where the shift from a cautious approach to becoming the world's leading military power has shaped the nation's global involvement. This transformation has driven largely by the Cold War rivalry with the Soviet Union, followed by the unipolar moment where the US, armed with unmatched military power and the constant support of Israel in the Middle East, and an ideology of spreading liberal democracy, engaged in numerous conflicts, some of which many now view as misguided. Professor John's perspective on the US as a Crusader state is a powerful lens through which to understand America's role in the world, one deeply committed to reshaping other nations through its value, often with profound and lasting consequences. As we look towards the future, these intervention divisions, along with changing global dynamics, will likely play a pivotal role in shaping America's role on the global stage. The question remains, though, will the US continue as the world's military superpower, or will the new approach to foreign policy emerge? If you made it this far, I ask you to like this video, subscribe, and keep this insight rolling in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.